The stage is set for New York City's mayoral general election debate tomorrow night. Three candidates, Zohran Mamdani, Andrew Cuomo, and Curtis Sliwa, will face off at Rockefeller Center. Joining us now, Nick Reisman, Politico reporter. Nick, good to have you with us. How you doing?
Thanks for having me.
All right, so how do you expect the tone or the dynamics compared to the primary debates now that we're in the final phases here?
Well, really, the biggest difference between the primary debates and this first general election debate is that Zohran Mamdani has gone from the underdog candidate to the front runner, and he's got a double-digit polling lead that he's really got to protect here going into this debate. So at the minimum, what he's got to do is kind of play prevent defense. You know, he's up by 2 touchdowns at this point, and obviously he wants to win next month. So at minimum, he's got to go in and have a mistake-free evening against former Governor Andrew Cuomo, who is his primary opponent at this point. Cuomo, who is running this independent bid, really has to have some sort of moment to break out of where he's been in polling, which has been running a distant second place behind Mamdani. He's gone from the presumed front runner to the underdog in this campaign. And really, Curtis Sliwa has to find a way to ensure that he is not going to be losing more Republican votes to Andrew Cuomo. Obviously, Cuomo is going to need to stitch together some sort of coalition of moderate Democrats, independents, and even some Republicans in New York City if he wants to win in November.
Nick, how surprised do you think Cuomo is the fact that he has not really been able to gain the traction or the ground on Mamdani's numbers?
Well, one thing that's really important to keep in mind here is that Andrew Cuomo lost the June primary by a pretty comfortable margin for Zohran Mamdani. So what he's really kind of struggling with over the last several weeks is how do you run against someone like Zohran Mamdani, who has a durable polling advantage? Yes, Mamdani has very high negatives when you look at polling, but he also has a lot of support, and it really has not evaporated during the summer. There really has not been a moment in the general election campaign so far that's really upended this race or been something of a game changer. So what Andrew Cuomo needs to do is find that moment to kind of exploit against Mamdani. But for him, time's really running short because we're only a few weeks away from the general election and from early voting beginning.
So, you know, you talk about Mamdani having this sizable lead and having to play prevent defense. If you're a football fan, you know prevent defenses usually don't go well because you're playing so far back that the other team does tend to score, even though you do have a big lead. Is that going to be feasible for Mamdani? They're going to come after him because they know, both Curtis, and Cuomo know that they've got to hit him, and they've got to hit him a number of times. Is it going to be difficult for him to be on the defensive like that?
Well, I think if you're Andrew Cuomo, yes, you're going to have to come out pretty aggressively and swing pretty aggressively here. But at the same time, it's worth noting that if Cuomo is a little too aggressive, if he comes across as a little too gruff or scoldy, as he quite frankly has during much of the primary, kind of that doom and gloom messaging that we saw through much of the year, it didn't really work with Democratic primary voters. Now, there's a whole segment of the population in New York City that has not voted yet. They have not been heard because it's a closed party primary. So there will be some voters who are receptive to an aggressive approach against Mamdani, who again is quite polarizing for New York City voters. It is just a matter of how Andrew Cuomo can kind of thread that needle by saying Zohran Mamdani is not right for the city, he's too inexperienced, and then he's got to pivot to, and here is the solution that I offer.
Let me ask you this. How much does this factor in when you hear the president saying, you know what, you're not going to get any federal dollars, you're not going to get this, you're not going to get that if you elect this guy mayor? Does that have an impact here in New York City when it comes to voting, do you think, for voters?
One thing to keep in mind is that Donald Trump is deeply unpopular in his hometown, even though he has perhaps made some gains in 2024 compared to when he ran in 2016 and 2020. It's important to note that the more Trump is seen as attacking Zohran Mamdani, the more that will likely drive up support among Democrats for Mamdani, even among Democrats who may have their reservations about him for a variety of reasons, either his stance on Israel or his level of inexperience. A lot of Democrats tend to detest the president a lot more than they do the Democratic nominee in a very deep blue city.
And as far as Mayor Adams, we're talking this morning about him potentially stepping up and endorsing one of the candidates. How much of an impact do you think that would be? Because it looks like all signs are pointing to Cuomo getting his endorsement.
I would say this, on the one hand, Mayor Adams and Andrew Cuomo share an overlapping base of voters of color. Working class voters tend to live in the outer boroughs. That is an important segment of the voting public that Andrew Cuomo needs if he wants to be successful in November. All of that said, Mayor Adams was polling in the single digits before he dropped out of the race, so it's not entirely clear just how much pull he would really have. And also, it's important to keep in mind he's going to still be on the ballot in November as well. So some people may, by accident, cast their vote for Mayor Adams, and that could still be significant if the race turns out to be quite close.
Everybody's names are still going to be on the ballot. Let me just ask you one last quick question. I got about 15 seconds with you. Curtis Sliwa, how can he muddy the waters here?
Curtis Sliwa is really going to have to try to find a way to break through beyond just the public safety messaging that he has had throughout this campaign. Obviously, he's a longtime fixture in New York City politics, kind of seen as this eccentric character, but he wants to be taken seriously. Can he have a night where he is taken seriously as a real candidate with the potential of winning, even though he's a Republican?
Yeah, Nick Weissman from Politico. Hey, thanks, Nick. Good to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
All right. To learn more about the mayoral candidates ahead of the debate, head over to cbsnewyork.com. All the information is right there.